this strikes a cleaner note than this. No, I said it wrong. This doesn't strike as good a note as this does. So a bigger rubber ball against these things produced a different quality of tone. And for me, what I thought was distinctive was less padding and a harder surface created a deeper, more intense vibration when striking the bowls. As though you're interested in any of that. Greetings. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor. If you just happen to be interested in Pilates, this might also be a good place to check out the point of view. So, 5 titles today, and hopefully not as much or as depth and long as yesterday, Mondays. Number 1 is Fantasy Pilates, right? Fantasy Pilates. And I often talk about make-believe Pilates, which is similar, don't you think? Whether you're make-believing or fantasizing, it's something as a quality other than reality, okay? And so, wanting to help you survive as a Pilates instructor, whatever your fantasy is of Pilates, whatever you enjoy making believe of it, right, or out of it, at least from the MMP point of view, you have a sense of reality beneath the fantasy, okay, or alongside or interwoven with, but you have a clue about the reality of things as well as how you like to interpret it all. And some would just as soon ignore it altogether, reality, but this isn't a broadcast for them. This is a broadcast for you, because reality has a way of biting fantasy in the behind. Number 2, it's a quote of mine that I've used often, and so I want to encourage you to think of it as a well-polished and worn set of words. And it comes out of me verbally in the midst of authority. You know, the authority of the movement, the complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit in the effort of the doing. Doing meaning the choreography of the mat, but it can be captured in a small moment as one side of one exercise. But in that moment of control, to me, that's what I mean by, how do I say that? Embodiment, meaning the embodiment of it is the ultimate authority. Oh, and why do I say that? Because thinking would assume that higher intellectual comprehension would be a higher authority, to the extent that you understand it more in your mind, that's a higher authority. As much as I'd like to agree with that, I don't think that's the case, because really it's about the experience, the complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. Joe's words, and mine are as a state of being in the body in the moment of the doing. It's just a tacked on clarification to what Joe's words stand and say all by themselves, which are contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. The point I want to make with you as an instructor is that no matter how smart gets, or smart is in the world out there, no matter how intellectually giant someone's thinking capacity is, the role of the Pilates instructor is to act, to give instructions to help your student find a coordination between three capacities. And it's in demonstration of that complete coordination of those three capacities that is the ultimate authority. And then you can think about it all you want. Okay? Such interesting titles today. Attic artifacts. That's number 3 in my number of titles out of 5. Attic artifacts. So on my social media stream went by a video clip of Ramana instructing. And you have to go figure out who Ramana is. And among a lot of other types of interaction or reflection on that, it led me to this whole notion of attic artifacts. So the artifacts that are up in the attic. And in this regard, somebody has video of Ramana instructing, and by virtue of the fact that they have it and you don't, it's in their attic and not yours. And so, I think to survive as a Pilates instructor, recognize whose artifacts they are and at what level those artifacts exist in the hierarchy of artifacts. That's what I'm pointing at. So if you physically have stuff that Joe physically had or used or made use of or was in his world physically, that's a pretty good artifact. And if you, where's the other one now? Hold on. Physically, artifact. And then beyond that, if you, other than physically, if you have, see the big one is, if you have media of Joe, or that Joe took, that's a whole level of artifact. A level below that would be a student of Joe's and someone releasing or displaying media through lineage is removed by one generation. So in that regard, that's the distinction I'm pointing to, is that the real artifacts in the attic are the ones of Joe, and not so much of anything that he physically had, as much as his book and his pictures and his video, his words, his images, and his video. Now, it's filmed for him, but those 3 artifacts of his art are what I'm talking about. Now, from my point of view, what mostly exists in the Pilates culture, which is mostly human nature expressing itself, is an interest to maintain and expand historical advantage into more. And insofar as making money, and if not making money, then just to take what is near and dear to you, regardless of money, and expand it out into the world. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to me and seeking reflection on how you can do that. The artifacts in the attic all plays into or supports a supposition that there's some truth in the attic that isn't available commonly, which is which is a means of saying that by the artifacts that I have in the attic, I know more than you do, and so I stand closer to the truth than you do. Right? Establishing some kind of hierarchy. And from that, I just reach into the bag that has puzzles, pieces in it. And that is my response to whatever artifacts are in the attic will never eclipse or contradict what is already common knowledge. That's MMP point of view. Because if you put enough of the puzzle pieces together, you find which fit together, and in seeing that they actually fit together, reveal a point of view at a deeper context than merely the individual pieces fitting together. That's when it all makes sense. That's when that connection to it as a language grows roots that you can feel growing. So, if someone points to artifacts in the attic and takes on the attitude of, it's an unknowable. What Pilates really is unknowable. It's a mystery. It's undefinable. It's intangible, although how could you say that, right? But it's something that is, to me, unknowable, is what it's presented as. There's mystery and there's just sanctity in the pursuit of something, especially because there's no knowing of it. And that's a point of view. And MMP just takes a different point of view than that, in that if you choose to, you can look at what's there, right out of Joe's book, and connect enough pieces to get to a sensation and to get to a comprehension of the grammar within the language of the choreography, to have the confidence to be an instructor and to base what comes next in your appraisal of what the movement that you see, be connected to and based upon the movement that you see. While being resonant to the ideal within the original work. So artifacts in the attic. That's one point of view, but it gets in the way for me of explaining to you how to understand Pilates ideally, because the ideally is based on reality rather than fantasy and make-believe and wishful thinking and presumed indulgence or presumed authority, right? To make it whatever you will. All of that's out there. But the reality of what it is and the fact that you listen to me and have some comprehension and control of this point of view, no amount of attic artifacts will eclipse what already is available in puzzle pieces that reveal the ideal within the original work, right out of Joe's book, Return to Life Through Contrology, right? The co-author is no relation to me. I think he was just a translator, but I don't know. Number 4. Okay, number 4 and number 5 are very specific Pilates-esque kind of discussions from a workshop. And the number 4 title is Sensing Range of Motion, or Determining Working Level. And as with everything about MMP, it's about sending a student into the cave of their own sensation, right? To help them know how to control their movement on their own. And the one that came to mind is in doing the roll up and your arms start back over your head. Well, that's outside of the range of a lot of people. How do I want to explain this? Okay, if you lie down supine, extend your arms toward the ceiling, and then as your arms reach back, the ribs lift up. Unless you're completely flexible in here, and you can differentiate your arms going completely back over your head without breaking at the rib cage to accommodate the range of motion in the arms. And so you can do this by holding one hand over the rib cage while the other arm goes back, to feel when the ribs like lift up, and to feel when your back comes up off the ground, right? And right there, you're helping a student pay attention to a sensation, and then recognize the difference between where they want to be versus where they don't want to be. They don't want the effort of their arms to take them out of the connection they have in the shoulders. Because the connection of the shoulders is so important to the connection at the hips. But you don't even have to go to the hips. You can just think about shoulders and ears, okay? And helping a student when they roll back and their arms go back, how far back? Well, it's only as far as they can reach back without letting their ribs disconnect and lift up, and their lower back lifts up. And they ruin the connection they have between their shoulders and their hips, right? So, working level are my 2 words to describe where the arms go and where the legs go when they're held out away from the trunk. If your legs are held out too heavy, too far away, and you can't support the load, and your grip breaks like in your wrist, right? I had the thought but never wrote it down. When you stand face to face with another human being and pose no threat and express, I always say, now don't hurt me. Because you can get hurt when you go wrist to wrist and interlock fingers, so chest to chest, hands down away from the body a little bit, and you interlace fingers with another human being. And I grew up learning it as American Indian wrestling. You know, there's also a version where you're supine, facing in opposite directions, side by side, and swinging legs, and on the 3rd time you hook legs. And one person usually stays where they are, and the other person goes flying. But in the hands thing, the Indian wrestling of the hands thing, and I always say that because that's how I know it as a means of wrestling, came from the American Indians. You get that wrist challenge of strength in wrist. And when you're broken in the wrist, there is no strength. And once you're broken in the wrist, it's very difficult to get out from being broken to where you even have a chance of gaining the upper hand. in this case, the hand that can curl under in strength, and impose that on someone who doesn't have the ability to do it against you. But that whole coiling at the hips, this is, you can feel it connect to the physics of what happens in the grip of the wrist is the very same physics that you engage in at the hips. And the position of your spine and your muscle and the engagement of your muscles determines the strength that you have in establishing that grip. Hence all the hubbub about neutral spine. Because why? Because it's in neutral spine that you have the most strength at the hips, and if that's true at the hips, it somehow connects to the shoulders, because the strength at the hips then extends itself into the dynamic tension at the shoulders and on to the ears. Number 5. So leg springs. I was going to say on the Cadillac, but it could be on a springboard or just 2 springs off of a wall. But you're supine and the springs are attached above your head and support your legs as you make circles with your legs. And the question is, which direction do you go in first and why? Everybody stands up, all the meters go wild, the entries on how to do that and why come in flooding in to the switchboard. And all of them have their own reasons for why they would say which way versus the other first. And so all I can do is not oppose any of them, but hopefully just clarify the one point of view that I'm pretty familiar with. MMP. This is the trademark of that brand of Pilates. And in and of itself, it is the Michael Miller trademark. And it points to the presence of core new tension in the body. It's an identification, if you will, of what's been there all along and continues to be there. It's just biomechanics on how the body achieves the movement that it's after. So, the question of which direction circles and why. Well, from the definition of Michael Miller Pilates, and from that point of view, the definition is uniform eccentric loading, flowing through progressive patterns of movement. Sort of 3 parts, but that definition seeks to, or says, that's its point of view of Pilates. And as such, it's an ideal based on the evidence within Joe's book. And the key thing here is understanding tension and loading and why he would be doing legs into leg springs from the consideration of therapeutically and not under the presumption of capability. Meaning that you don't want to hurt your student and you want to put them in leg circles because you think that would be good. And I'm making a small little distinction about which direction circles. But it matters because if you hold the legs together and push the legs together out into tension, then when they come apart, each leg has to bear the tension of the spring out there at a distance. And yet, legs are different and have different capabilities. And so, you presume on whatever is the weaker leg being able to handle that much tension on its own. See what I'm saying? So that, within the MMP point of view, and taking the loading or the direction of thing in layers, by taking the legs individually apart and out into tension to make a circle and come back, allows each leg to express itself in its own capacity, which is one of the reasons I'm there as a Pilates instructor, is to see how the legs work individually. Because, oddly enough, you know, different legs have different capacities and ranges. And so the answer to the question is, I would go out, away from center first, which sounds, you know, heretical, contrary to, from the center out, but starting away from center and at ease, some part away from center, individually taking both legs out into tension and back, before you group them together and perhaps put too much tension on a limb that it can't handle that tension all by itself when it splits away. The humility that comes from teaching is being of service to those who are dealing with their humanity. And I say that meaning dealing with themselves as human beings and the conditions that they find themselves in. Because the spectrum of application and supplication to Pilates, of Pilates, yeah, is for a good reason, right? Because it's so effective. And yet knowing what makes it effective, or at least knowing what makes it what it is, and using that within whatever else you've got to be effective, as though there could be anything else. So I leave you with these thoughts that MMP is reality-based. Okay, it's based on Joe's choreography. Just look at it, do it for a routine, and the more routine you get at it, the deeper connection you have to it. And that's because it's sensational. See, MMP is to die for, as my friend would say, but it reaches for an ideal that has a corrective loop in it, meaning that you have to listen to, you know, your sensations, the feedback that comes in. You just can't think it. You have to listen to what's happening. And so it's an ideal reach into what becomes real and has to offer the ideal results that structured its conception. Recognizing the brush as a brush lets you step back from the bristles and use the bristles collectively for the purpose of their intent, you know, to paint with. Sorry if that's too, but it can always go south. It's funny, when I get to my most connection, deepest of what my connection to it, perhaps comes fear with it, but the notion of that things can go south. And so as a Pilates instructor, you know way too much already coming from me, and I hope that you hear it and digest it to the point of never having to learn from personal experience how much you can regret things going south and not being prepared for it to the point where it never really got that far. See, that's your job as an instructor. I was thinking in my mind like a bodyguard. The body took me to being, thinking, and observing, and in that way, a guard for all of those capacities and the effort to coordinate them. So much of the thinking wants to horn its way into significance and relevance when it will always be that part of the capacity of a human being. Key emphasis on the word part. So life can't live forever. Read between the lines and see behind the curtain and add two and two. Direct your thinking while you can. Geist.